we have Dr. Marvin, who will be our guest host, and he'll be moderating the presentation tonight. And again, we are so grateful to have people like him. Sherry and I were joking about this with Ken, but it's really not a joke. In reality, he's basically our adult supervision here.
Maybe we should call him when we have an argument.
Yeah, maybe he can help clear the dust or help us settle the dust or something. But we are so grateful to have him. He has done quite a few webinars for us, but really he's done a lot more. He has helped us get, in terms of the video and the DVD recording. The wonderful person who is working with us was recommended to us by Dr. Marvin, and he has gotten some key people to be on these webinars. So we are so grateful to have Dr. Marvin on and just jumping in with us and helping us do what we do. So before, I'm going to ask Sherry to read out Dr. Ken's bio, and then Sherry, you just hand over to Dr. Marvin. But Dr. Marvin, again, I say thank you.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about Ken. Ken has been RBC Life Sciences Senior Vice President of Operations and member of the Board of Directors since joining the company in 1998. Prior to joining the company, he was the Vice President of Operations for 2Life, LLC, a startup network marketing company. Prior to joining 2Life, he was employed by Light Force Incorporated, where he served as the Controller and Chief Operating Officer. We've just recently gotten to know Ken, and he seems like a terrific guy, so we are very grateful to have him with us tonight. So I guess I'm handing it now over to Dr. Marvin.
Thank you, Sherry. Well, I was very fortunate to meet Ken Shabbat a month or so ago and talk to him about sharing his knowledge, which is extensive, in the healthcare field. So I'm as anxious as everybody else to hear about spirulina because I'm pretty ignorant in that field. In fact, all I know is what I've learned from him previously. So without ado, I want to turn it over to you, Ken. We're fortunate to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Marvin. As we were talking before, I've been around spirulina now since 1981. I came into the field of network marketing and nutritional products in 1981, and when I was introduced to spirulina, I was quite a skeptic. But I can truly say that spirulina is one of those things that's really changed my life and really led me to believe that spirulina is truly one of nature's miracle foods. And in order to really tell the story about spirulina, I've sort of got to tell a little bit about my story, but more importantly, I've got to tell the story of Dr. Christopher Hills. Christopher Hills is considered to be the father of spirulina. He's the person that has probably done most, certainly in North America, to bring spirulina back into prominence than anybody else. And I think his quest and what became for him, as Dr. David said, a calling and a cause, is a great story, and it also tells an awful lot about spirulina. Now, Christopher Hills was born in Grimsby, England, in 1926, and Grimsby, England was a fishing town. And when World War II came around, he joined the British Merchant Navy, which would be the equivalent of our Merchant Marine. He joined the Merchant Navy while he was 17, 18 years old, and he often traveled through the Panama Canal. And I had the interesting opportunity to go on a trip with him to Panama, and we walked through the canal, and he was basically explaining to me how, as a young kid, traveling through the Panama Canal, he really had a major change in his life. And it started off very simply by seeing all the herbs and the spices and the abundance of things that you could buy very inexpensively in Panama. And he realized the teas and the different herbs, how much they cost in England. And it made a big impression on this young sailor. And, you know, one of the things about Christopher Hills is that things that made a big impression on him, he just didn't let go of. He decided that this was an opportunity for him, and this was a wonderful thing to get involved with. So after the war, he came back to and settled with his wife Nora in the West Indies, and he became a successful businessman. And as he was prompted during the war, he became successful at being a spice trader. He would buy commodities, sell commodities. He would buy teas, go back to England and sell teas. He became very, very prominent in the West Indies for doing that, and became very, very successful. He was also someone who was incredibly resourceful, and he realized as he was a young business person that things that were very common in England didn't exist in the West Indies, and some of those things were very, very simple. Insurance companies, insuring businesses, things like Lloyd's of London that did background information on businesses. So while he was trading in his spices and teas, he also became someone who got involved in multiple businesses. And luckily for him, with his enthusiasm and his knowledge, he retired a fairly wealthy man at the age of 30 years old. And his energy, the energy that this man brought to everything that he did was truly amazing to me, somewhat scary at times when I was on the front end of it. But if he got something in his mind, he would pursue it. And at the age of 30, after he retired, he realized that he wanted to learn more about the world. And leaving his wife and 2 small children behind in the West Indies, he took off on traveling and ended up in India. Now, he didn't leave his wife and children. He just went on this personal quest. And he lived and traveled throughout India for 2 years, meeting with the people, finding out different things about culture, just involving himself with Indian life with the intention of learning as much as he could about other people, other lifestyles, and seeing what he could find in the East in terms of finding enlightenment for himself. And this is a picture of him probably in the late 50s, early 60s, traveling throughout India. And what his real interest was meeting learned people in India and trying to see what he could learn from those people. And he talked about meeting what I guess in the 60s were called gurus, and learned men and people who were teaching him different meditation techniques. And he told me this story that while he was sort of literally coming down from a mountain from one of these meetings during the day, I guess they went up in the mountain and spent the day up there talking and meditating, that at the bottom of the hill there were all these children with outstretched hands in extreme poverty and very, very hungry. And it just struck him like a thunderbolt that he couldn't find any personal fulfillment or enlightenment in his life, nor could really anybody else until we found some solution to feeding hungry people on the planet. And that moment changed his whole life. He said at that moment he realized that he had to do something to find a solution to world hunger, and he truly dedicated the rest of his life to that cause. When he went back to the West Indies, he started experimenting with different algae. He had read in various journals that one of the great protein sources on the planet were found in very microscopic algae. So he started experimenting with algae. Now, his training was as a merchant seaman, and as I mentioned, he went to sea at 17, 18 years old. So he had really no formal training. So he taught himself to many of the skills that a microbiologist would need. And he was a very quick learner, and he became fascinated with studying algae and trying to see if there was something about the algae and the protein yield of algae that could really help him to find a food for hungry people. And about that time in the mid-60s, he met a man named Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura. Now, Dr. Nakamura was a microbiologist in Japan, and one of the stories that Hills told me was that right before World War II, the emperor or representatives of the emperor came to visit him because he was fairly renowned as an algae researcher at the university. And they basically said, we're about to go to war, and we need to find a very high protein source. And they set him on the task of investigating different algae to see which algae would be the most acceptable as a protein source to try to feed people in Japan. As you know, they have a limited land mass, and they realized on that limited landmass they couldn't grow the protein they needed. So he was set off on what became his life's journey to try to find some algae that could possibly help to provide protein to the Japanese. And in about 1965, he came across a book that was based on some French researchers that had gone to Africa and gone to Lake Chad. And at Lake Chad, they saw that the algae were being eaten by the indigenous people there, and the people seemed extremely healthy for people that didn't have an awful lot of resources. So he became very interested in that particular kind of algae, and that was his first real encounter with spirulina, which is one type of algae. And in 1965, Hills and Nakamura decided to form the Microalgae International Union because they were trying to coordinate whatever research was going on at that time around the world and help to develop microalgae as a food. And now, as we all know, in 1965, you just didn't get online and join a webinar to talk to all the learned people. In fact, you didn't have a really easy forms of communication. Back then, you probably just had the old telex to send telegraphs to people around the world, and the old style of just simply writing letters. And that's what they did. They wrote to the algae researchers around the world and formed this Microalgae International Union so they could all share their knowledge and to come up with a protein source. And Hills and Nakamura slowly started focusing their research on two different kinds of algae. One was called chlorella. Chlorella is an algae that is very popular, was very popular in Japan, and something that Dr. Nakamura had studied extensively. And both of them had come across different information about spirulina. And although Nakamura, most of his background was in chlorella, they both started seeing that spirulina might be the possible source they were looking for. When you compare the two, chlorella has an awful lot of protein also, as does spirulina. Spirulina is about 65% protein, and where chlorella, I believe, is more in the 50% range. So they felt that chlorella was a close second, but they were still sort of leaning towards chlorella as they started to investigate spirulina. And here's a picture of Hills in an early lab, and you can see the petri dish he's looking at, and under the microscope you can see spirulina. You can't see it with the naked eye, but under the powerful microscope you can see the spirulina, and they get their name for the spiral shape that they have. And these are all single-celled algae, and the one interesting thing about the spiral shape became very important as they went forward. And one of the reasons they finally decided on spirulina was its ease in harvesting. And when you think of harvesting something that you can't see, that's a real task. But the fact that they had long spirals would make spirulina easier to catch in either in a basket or in some sort of a screening device, because the spirals themselves would get caught in the screens, where chlorella, which is a very, very small circular type of algae, would fall through those screens. So when they weighed the alternatives, they realized that spirulina had the higher protein and spirulina would be much easier to harvest, so they decided that spirulina was going to be the best food source that they could research. One other thing they knew about spirulina that they didn't know as much about with chlorella is that spirulina was a safe and effective protein source because it was a staple in the diets of the Mayas and the Toltec and the Aztec people of Mexico dating back hundreds of years. And the Aztecs and the Mayans used to basically farm the lakes, and they would gather near the rocks this green algae, and they called it tequilate. And when you look at the actual translation of tequilate, it comes something close to rock feces. It was so abundant around the rocks that they saw it as rock feces, but they realized that there was a real important food source for them, and they had been using it for a long, long time. And there's lots of stories about the Mayan people farming spirulina and using it as their main source of protein in years where their crops just weren't producing at all. The Aztec people in Mexico farmed the lakes around Mexico City. As a lot of you know, Mexico City was full of lakes all around the city before the Spanish came in and drained off the lakes. And with it went a lot of the spirulina. I remember as a kid, I grew up in California, and we always heard stories about the missionaries coming up into California, and we also heard a lot of stories about the Aztecs in Mexico. And for some reason, I never forgot this story that they were talking about the messengers who would run all night, sort of almost similar to our Pony Express, from run tremendous distances and pass a message to the next messenger who would run all night the next day and pass a message to the next messenger until it finally got to Montezuma. And they were always eating this green stuff that they carried with them. And I never knew what the green stuff was, so I got involved with spirulina and realized what they were eating along the way to give them energy, and a quick source of energy was spirulina. So they knew it was easy to harvest, they knew it had 65% to 70% protein, and they knew it was safe and effective because it had hundreds of years of history. They also knew that it grows naturally in the African lakes, and it's been part of the daily diet of many of the African people since ancient times. And the Africans, and you can see a good picture of it here near Lake Chad, they would simply take woven baskets and they would dip it in the lakes, and because of the spiral shape, they would catch the spirulina in the baskets. And then they would just dump it out, and you can see here it looks like it's either on a rock or on sand, and they would let the cakes dry, or let the algae dry into cakes. They called them dihi cakes, and they ate the dihi cakes as a source of algae. And if you look at the picture of Lake Bogoria, and you can see all the flamingos in Lake Bogoria, that's what Lake Bogoria is famous for, and you can see the water in the lake, you can see how green the water in Lake Bogoria is. And that's because the lakes in Africa are very high in alkalinity, and spirulina thrives in a high alkaline environment. One of the things that it does is that most algae, other algae, cannot survive at that level of alkalinity, and so the spirulina are sort of left on their own. They don't have to compete with other algae, and they multiply fairly quickly. And one of the interesting things about the spirulina and the carotene properties of spirulina is they give the flamingos their bright pink colors because they feed on the carotene-rich algae, and that gives them their bright pink colors. Many years ago, the San Diego Zoo was having problem with a lot of their flamingos were getting ill, and they weren't feeding well. And I'm not sure if they contacted us, that we contacted them, but we donated spirulina to them for years, and their flamingos in the San Diego Zoo thrived on the spirulina. And so, because they knew that spirulina grew naturally in different parts of the world, that there was never any report of any toxicity with spirulina, they really believed that they had really found the answer in spirulina. And Hills at some point travels to the Rift Valley in Africa, where most of these alkaline lakes are. And this is an early picture of him, probably in the mid-60s, and you can see him with his little kit there, not very, very sophisticated, but he's taking samples out of the lakes of spirulina, and he's putting them in long tubes. And ultimately, some of those strains of algae of spirulina they took out of those lakes became the seed culture for him developing very, very strong strains of spirulina. Hills did travel around the world with Nakamura. They both became very passionate about finding a food source. When they zeroed in on spirulina, in some ways they became like two kids, and traveled around the world together and tried to find all the proof that they can this would be a tremendous food source for people. And then Hills, when he returned to the U.S. and to Europe, for years he wrote, he lectured, he tried to convince governments to fund spirulina projects. I know he mentioned to me that he had talked with President Johnson, he had talked with Nehru in India, he had talked to many of the commissioners of the United Nations, And while everybody said this was a great idea, that spirulina certainly sounded wonderful, and it was truly a great protein source, and yes, it could be harvested very inexpensively, when it came down to it, nobody really seemed to care all that much about feeding the hungry people around the world. And that really frustrated Hills, because he felt that, as a learned man, that if you could present the arguments to people that this was easy to get, it was a high protein source, it was perfectly safe, people could survive on just eating the spirulina alone, that governments would invest something in trying to farm the lakes in Africa. But unfortunately, they didn't. Now, I mentioned that Hills grew up in England, and he and Nora Hills were a very conservative English couple, although Hills was somewhat esoteric by nature, and many people didn't see him as conservative at all. But they just decided that, well, if no one will give us money, we'll just have to raise it ourselves. So in 1979, and now they were living in the United States in a little teeny town in the Santa Cruz Mountains called Boulder Creek, California. Boulder Creek had a total population at that time of about 600 or 700 people. I'm familiar with Boulder Creek because I moved there myself in 1971. Actually, never bumped into Christopher and Nora Hills. But they just decided that they would start a network marketing company. Now, these are just sort of a proper English couple. He was a lecturer and wrote books and did all this algae research. They didn't really have any experience with network marketing companies. They actually went out and made signs that say there's going to be they went to the local church, and they asked the priest if they could use the church one night, and he said sure they could. So they put out signs on telephone poles in this thriving metropolis of Boulder Creek, California, which only had one stop sign. It didn't even have a stoplight back then, and a total population of about 600 or 700 people. And they said, we're starting a company, please come to the church. And had they asked me, I would have told them they were crazy. I would have told them that there was no way anybody was going to show up at the church, and certainly if anybody showed up in the church, you weren't going to start a network marketing company from Boulder Creek, California. But somehow they knew a whole lot more than I did, and that's just what happened. That was the very first meeting of the Light Force Company in 1979. From there, the company pretty well grew consistently. Their only product was spirulina. I think it was a combination of spirulina and their enthusiasm, and their feeling that they had a cause and a calling to help feed hungry people that attracted an awful lot of people to the company. I joined the company in 1981, but when I joined in 1981, most of the employees, not all, but most of the employees were volunteers, and I was one of the first outside professionals that they hired. I had been a CPA in Los Angeles for many years, and then decided I didn't really enjoy going to work every day, so I became a teacher and taught high school for about 11 years in San Jose. And 3 kids later, I really couldn't afford to teach any longer, unfortunately, and somehow they contacted me out of the blue, and I went and met with them and had tea with them, proper tea, one night, and I was hired as the person to become their controller and run the operations of the company. And the first thing he did was he went out to hire the best scientists he could find from around the world. And this gentleman here is Dr. Katawa Kawaguchi. And Kawaguchi was actually a student of Nakamura's. And he had also become inspired by Nakamura. And he, at this particular time, this was in 1980-81, Kawaguchi was just becoming someone who was convincing some of the Taiwanese to start growing chlorella on Taiwan. He had created a couple of chlorella ponds on Taiwan and actually started experimenting with how one goes about growing algae. He also hired Sebastian Thomas. Now, Sebastian Thomas is from India, and Sebastian had graduated from the University in India, and he was a microbiologist. And I guess you'd call both of them agologists. They were algae specialists within microbiology. And after Sebastian got out of the university, and I think he maybe worked a year or so, he got involved with a very, very big conglomerate in India. And a small research division in this conglomerate wanted to see if they could go out to rural villages and create algae ponds and basically use the algae as a source, a protein source for the people in these villages. And they sent Sebastian to some of these rural villages, and he had the task of trying to establish the ponds, educate the people on how they could grow the spirulina, and actually set up some very, very crude ways for maintaining and harvesting small spirulina ponds in these remote villages. And he was telling me last year when we got together that their first pond, you have to have the water moving. So they had created a very small circular pond and hooked up some sort of a paddle device that somebody rode a bicycle around the pond, and that riding the bicycle around the pond would stir the algae and keep the algae from going dormant. They had a series of people all day long riding these bicycles around the ponds. Sebastian became fairly knowledgeable about growing algae, theoretically, as well as some very small practical experience. And in 1979, he had written a paper, and there was going to be an algae conference in Taiwan. And so he presented the paper to the algae conference in Taiwan, and it was accepted, and he was going to go to Taiwan and present his paper. But he got a call from his boss to say, Sebastian, I just heard that the United Nations is sponsoring an algae conference in Israel. We'd like you to go to Israel instead of presenting your paper in Taiwan. Well, Sebastian went off to Israel to the United Nations conference. It just so happens, though, that Christopher Hills was attending that conference in 1979. And although the paper never was presented, it was lying on the table for those to take a copy of Sebastian's paper. And Hills picked it up and read the paper and was fascinated by the fact that here was someone who had actually started building some very, very small ponds and understood the sequence of culturing the algae, of growing it out, getting it ready to grow in larger ponds. And he immediately contacted Sebastian. This was probably early 1980, and offered him a job to come to the United States. And Sebastian and his wife, Swati, who was also a microbiologist, accepted the opportunity to come to the United States. What Hills didn't tell him at the time, though, is that he was going to send him to Kenya on the way to the United States. So Sebastian and Swati went off and farmed and learned all about Lake Bogoria in Kenya for a year, and he was one of the team of people that were trying to convince the Kenyan government that it would be very, very easy to farm Lake Bogoria and Lake Kenyatta and split the yield and feed hungry people. But when that failed and the Kenyans didn't want anything to do with it, we brought Sebastian to the United States. At that time, this is a picture of Swati Thomas, his wife, and this is what you really have to do is you have to culture many, many different strains of spirulina. And the goal was to develop a pure strain, and a strain not only that was pure, but a strain that could live under more harsh conditions than where spirulina is normally found. Spirulina is normally found around the equator, Mexico, countries in Central Africa. But what Hills wanted to do is see if he could develop a strain that could survive in a little colder environment. So what they ended up doing was simply through a selection process, and this is a representation of it, but it was actually how they did it. They would grow different algae. Some they would grow to maximize its carotene yield. Some they would grow to maximize its protein yield. Some they would grow to maximize this very, very important element of the algae makeup called phycocyanin. And some they developed to see if they could survive in the cold. And they would actually take the individual strains of algae from one petri dish and put it on another, and then subject that to other conditions to see if they could strengthen the algae. And it was a very, very slow and tedious process, but they finally started coming up with what they always jargoned a pure culture. Now, this is in early 1981. There are no facilities in the entire world growing spirulina or chlorella, although there was some spirulina or some chlorella ponds on Taiwan. Most of the spirulina in the world was being farmed out of Lake Texcoco in Mexico, and that was almost by accident. The Mexicans, a soda company bought the rights to the lake, and they were wanting to get rid of the algae so they could grow soda in the lake, and realized that maybe somebody was interested in purchasing the spirulina. And so Sosa Texcoco, which was farming Lake Texcoco, became the real first algae producer in the world. But no one really knew how to grow the algae in human-made ponds, so they next had to buy a research facility. And this is what was a public swimming pool in Boulder Creek, California. This is 1981, late 81, early 82. My kids were, I think my boys were 6 years old. My daughter was 9 or 10. And when they found out I was working for the guy that closed down Forest Swimming Pool, they were not happy campers with me at all for many, many months. You can see this is where the deck of the swimming pool is. This was the public swimming pool. Back here was where they sold tickets and hamburgers and hot dogs. And Hills bought the facility. It was actually having a lot of plumbing problems, and the city was trying to get rid of it. And you can see a very rudimentary beginning of trying to figure out how you grow this stuff. And we turned the old hamburger place into a laboratory. And this little pond right here we called a seed pond. And the sequence was that you grew the algae in the Petri dishes, and once you got them in Petri dishes, you put them in flasks, and you diluted the flasks 10 to 1, 10 times water to algae. And when the spirulina grew to fill the space, you moved it to a larger flask that was 10 times larger than that. And at some point, you got to the largest flask you had, and then you built what was called a seed pond that was 10 times larger than that. And this is the seed pond where we would take the cultures that we had developed. It really took weeks and weeks and weeks to get it to that stage. And we would grow it in the seed pond. And again, a 10 to 1 ratio. And these were called raceways. And the raceways were built to be 10 times larger than the seed ponds. And once the seed pond had grown, the algae became dense in the seed pond, you would take the algae from the seed pond and you would move it into the raceways. And you could see that this was a very, very crude paddle wheel right here that was turning to make the water go around. The algae, as long as you give them a sunlight and a very simple nutrient base that keeps the alkalinity high and keep the water moving, they're happy as can be. So we went from the lab to seed ponds to raceways, and then from the raceways we went to this much larger pond, which turned out to be the swimming pool that was larger than 10 times the raceway, but that's really all we had at the time. Boulder Creek is in Northern California. You can see some heat lamps here. It got cold at night, much colder than it would get in Africa or Mexico, so we had to keep the algae warm at night so they wouldn't, you end up with, when the conditions aren't right, there becomes a biological crash of the pond, and you lose everything. So we had to keep, at night had to keep them warm. You could see that the big pond had 2 paddle wheels and a divider to allow the water to move around. This was a fascinating place with lots of experimentation. In this little shack here, this little wood shack, was a diesel motor that ran the paddle wheels. And one day, I remember Hills got the bright idea that he wanted to see that if you pipe the diesel exhaust into the water, if the algae would basically take in the carbon monoxide from the diesel and churn out oxygen, which is what algae does, and without the algae itself becoming non-edible. So we just did what he said. We ended up pumping the diesel exhaust into the algae ponds. He proved that the algae basically took the carbon monoxide, turned it into oxygen, and that the algae was just as healthy to eat as it was before. So there were lots of different experiments going on at that time at the research facility. I was still pretty much of a non-believer, and because Sebastian had shown up and I was somewhat of an outsider and he was somewhat of an outsider, I sort of went to him for knowledge. And I remember this is the raceway, looking at it from the side. And I remember this day distinctly because we were standing there. We just left the laboratory, and he was explaining to me some experiment he was doing in the lab. And I pulled him aside and I said, Sebastian, what's really going on here? I mean, how can this stuff that we're just moving around in the water, I can't even see it, how is this stuff going to feed hungry people around the world? You know, I didn't think this was a scam, but I just couldn't understand what Hills knew intuitively, that this could become a food source. And standing right here, he told me this story. He said, imagine that instead of this being a pond of algae, imagine if it were a field of corn. He said, so this field of corn, we're going to monitor this field of corn, and when the field of corn gets close to harvest time, we're going to harvest it. And when you decide when to harvest algae, you harvest the algae when it is by optical density. When you look at the water and you take measurements and the water becomes more than 66% dense, in other words, there's 66% of that space is now filled up by algae and only 1/3 of it by water, that's when you want to go ahead and harvest. Now, you only harvest half. So he said, imagine this field of corn, and we're going to harvest half. I said, okay. So he said, half of that field we're going to harvest today. And he said, and 3 days later, it's going to grow back again. And it's going to be ready to harvest again. And then we're going to harvest it again. And then 3 days later, it's going to be ready to harvest again. And all of a sudden, I got what Hills was talking about, that not only was this high in protein, not only was this relatively easy to harvest, not only was it safe and effective and had been used for literally thousands of years, but it grew geometrically. It didn't grow linearly. It grew geometrically to fill the void in the space. So once you got to a harvest point, after these weeks and weeks and weeks of bringing the algae up from one stage to the other, you had a near inexhaustible supply of protein. And that day really made me understand what Hills was all about. And I really started at that point to say, wow, this is really interesting. So I really started for the first time to sort of look at what spirulina really was. And here's what I found. That spirulina really is a miracle food. It's 65 to 70% protein. Now, of that protein, 95% of it is digestible. So if you multiply 95% times 70, you're pretty well around 65% usable, digestible protein. And you compare that to meat, which is only about 20% digestible. It has actually 3.5 times more protein than beef or eggs. On top of all that protein, protein is made up of amino acids. It contains all of the essential amino acids, and all of those essential amino acids are in the correct proportions. Plus, it's got 9 non-essential amino acids on top of that. Not only that, it's low in calories, it's low in cholesterol, it's about 5% fat, 18% carbohydrates. It's very, very rich in glycogen for quick energy. That's why the Aztecs intuitively knew that if you ate the spirulina, you would have energy to do these long runs carrying messages to Montezuma. It also contains rhamnose, ribose, fucose, xylose, mannose, galactose, and glucose. So there's lots of sugars in spirulina, glycogen being the most abundant. It has 25 times more beta-carotene than carrots. Now, you always think of carotenes as something that's bright orange, but the truth is when you really look at carotenes, they're very, very often so dark reds and dark oranges, and sometimes they become so dark they almost look black. And spirulina has, 1 teaspoon of spirulina is 180% of the U.S. RDI of beta-carotene. It's also the highest whole food source of vitamin B12. A lot of vegetarians have a problem with vitamin B12 because vitamin B12 is usually found in meats. Spirulina, of all of the food sources, it has the highest source of B12, and on top of that, that is bioavailable B12, where a lot of other things that have B12, the B12 really isn't bioavailable. So it's got protein, it's rich in carotenes, it's got lots of B12, it's rich in other B vitamins, it's got a lot of B1, B2. It has 3 times more vitamin E than wheat germ, which is considered a very high source of vitamin E. On top of all of that, it's got 2 to 6 times more iron than beef liver. It's loaded with naturally chelated minerals. It's richer in chlorophyll than alfalfa or wheatgrass, and chlorophyll is thought to be the closest thing to human blood that there is. It contains superoxide dismutase, which is an antioxidant. Superoxide is the most common free radical in the body, and a superoxide dismutase is something that tends to counteract this superoxide free radical. It also has 3 times more gamma-linoleic acid than evening primrose oil. When I was first going to health food stores in the 60s, I was led to believe that evening primrose oil was the highest source of gamma-linoleic acid. On top of all of that, and it's really hard to say on top of all of that, but the true treasure, I think, in spirulina comes in its carotenes and pigments. It's got alpha, beta, gamma carotene, the pigment chlorophyll, xanthophyll. I highlighted phycocyanin because phycocyanin is one of those pigments. It's the blue-green pigment in spirulina that is probably the most important pigment of all the pigments in spirulina. And there are some things that several years ago none of you probably thought you had ever heard of until all of a sudden it got some press, like lycopene. Now everybody's talking about lycopene. They've got lycopene in Bugs Bunny vitamins. And astaxanthin. Now people are talking about astaxanthin, which is another tremendous carotene. Phycocyanin is up with all of those. And there's lots and lots of research going on about this blue-green pigment in spirulina, and you're going to hear more about phycocyanin. It also has canthaxanthin, zeaxanthin, myeloxanthophyll, cryptoxanthin. So you can see, going back here, that you've got high protein, you've got amino acids, you've got B vitamins, you've got iron, you've got SOD, you've got lots of glucose, glycogen, and you've got tremendous carotenes and pigments. And truly, when you look at all of this, you can see why this incredible little microscopic algae really packs a wallop. It's got more in it, pound for pound, than anything else that there is. We went beyond the swimming pool, and we started to build a production facility in the California desert near Palm Springs in a town called Desert Hot Springs. You can see the early stages of production, excavating the land, creating the first initial ponds and the different ponds. The big building that we built contained the laboratory, a harvesting area. It's hard to see, but this is a 3-story spray dryer to spray the algae. This was really a beautiful facility, and unfortunately, because of the wind gusts, we spent a lot of years. Sebastian and his wife spent a lot of years in the desert in California trying to make a go of this facility, and we got it to a pilot production stage, and we were probably producing maybe 5+ metric tons a year, which really wasn't enough to sustain the facility. And at some point, we had to give up the venture because we had too many biological problems in the California desert. In the meantime, we had gone into a joint venture partnership with an Israeli company, which was a subsidiary of one of their giant companies called Core Industries. And the Israelis also had, in their food division, realized that that the future was going to be in things such as algae. And they were interested in growing an algae called Dunaliella, which is very high in beta-carotene. And Hills was interested in Dunaliella also. So we joint ventured with the Israeli company, and we're partners in this production facility near the Gulf of Eilat. Eilat is a beautiful place. It's probably got the best scuba diving in the world. And if you ever fly into Eilat, you fly right over these production ponds, which are still in existence. This was a wonderful facility. We produced Dunaliella, and we produced spirulina. We are probably producing about 25 metric tons of spirulina a year, as well as doing lots of experimentation with Dunaliella. For us, however, Israelis were tough people to deal with in a lot of ways, and Israel was going through hyperinflation. So our amount that we had to kick into the partnership every year was going to be, as long as we bought a 15 to 20 metric tons, the partnership was going to be fine. And it turned out that 15 or 20 metric tons started costing us 2 or 3 or 4 times what it should cost us because of the inflation in Israel. So we ended up leaving that partnership. I believe the Israelis ultimately sold these wonderful ponds to the Japanese, who are very, very expert at extracting pigments from algae. This is where we grow our spirulina today. We don't own this facility, but this facility is in India, and you can see what a modern production facility looks like compared to that experimental facility we had in Boulder Creek, California. Now, I've got a picture here of Sebastian Thomas, because Sebastian Thomas, after I unfortunately had to let him go from the California facility, went back to India and went back to the large company that he had been with before, and they had gone a little farther downstream with their research projects, and they wanted Sebastian to help them create a production facility. And this is the production facility that Sebastian created in India. It is truly the best spirulina production facility in the world, bar none. There's good facilities in Hawaii. That's a great facility. Good people run that facility. This is the best facility in the world, the best run and the best equipped. And you can see how those little ponds have become really large ponds. One paddle wheel design just at one end. The right design will keep the water moving through these ponds very, very effectively. The weather in India is perfect for the growth of spirulina, and you can see this is in a rural environment, just beautiful countryside, and this produces the best spirulina in the world. Now, a little bit about the mechanics of spirulina. You can see these ponds, and they're beautiful, but you can see right here on each pond there's some plumbing. And the plumbing is very important because that's the manner in which we harvest the spirulina. Going back to the example of Forest Pool, and when it got to be about 2/3 optical dense, we would harvest half. That's pretty much what they do at these facilities. And you harvest it, you don't take it out bucket by bucket, you just use the plumbing, and you empty out about half of the pond. And what you empty it out into is inside the facility. I'm going to take you back one step here to the culturing process. And you can see these are multiple cultures of different algae. The green obviously is spirulina. The red algae is something called Homeococcus, which has other pigments in it. I'm not exactly sure what this is, but it might be Dunaliella in its early stages. And you can sort of see that different flasks are at different heights. And this is what I was talking about, the culturing stage. It starts off at a very, very small end with test tubes, and then it goes to these small flasks, and then it goes to larger flasks, and then it goes to, this is the seed pond that they have in India, and you can see that the seed pond is a small pond. It's got a small paddle wheel. All of this this is a food-grade liner, and because we're growing a food product, you have to line the ponds with food-grade liners, and the food-grade liners will be good for several harvests. They're very, very expensive liners, but you can see that from the lab, you come in here to the seed ponds, and then from the seed ponds, you ultimately go out to the very large ponds we just talked about. And when you're ready to harvest, you just, and this is all computer generated now, computer controlled, you flip the switch, and it starts harvesting about half of the water in the pond. And what it ends up doing through that plumbing, it comes in here, and it goes into these things that are called vibratory separators, and they're called vibratory separators because that's just what they do. Inside here, there's about, up in here, there's probably about 6 or 7 different screens. The very top screen has the largest opening, and as you get further and further down, you get to where the openings in the screen are just a few microns across. Again, you're trying to trap something that is microscopic, so you have to have a sieve device or screens that will hold onto the spirulina. And these things just bounce up and down, they vibrate, and all the water comes down to the bottom. The water that comes down to the bottom gets recycled back into the ponds because it contains all the nutrients that were in the ponds, and the nutrients aren't sacrificed, they go back into the ponds. The algae gets moved from here into containers, and at this point the algae is a very dark blue-green sludge. And then it goes into spray dryers, and this is the very bottom end of a spray dryer. Spray dryer is usually about 2 stories tall. The algae gets sprayed in through a nozzle, not too much different than a shower nozzle. And at the very, very top, as soon as it comes out of that nozzle, it's hit with a lot of heat. And that heat immediately flash dries off the remaining moisture in the product, and it slowly just moves its way down this chamber until it comes up here, and then you simply empty it out, and that's spirulina. And when it comes out of the spray dryer, this is exactly what it looks like. It's just a fine green powder. All the water has been taken out of it. It is ready to eat just like it is. When we sell spirulina powder, this is exactly what we sell. There's nothing added to it. You can also take spirulina powder and make it into tablets. And spirulina will tablet. It's an art form to learn how to do it, but once you learn how to do it, you can tablet spirulina without adding a lot of with binders and other excipients. Just a very small amount of magnesium stearate to lubricate it. Or you can take the spirulina powder, add some very minor flow agents to let it flow through machinery, and you can put them in capsules and encapsulate the product. So spirulina is a very pure product. It comes right out of the ponds. It gets dried. The powder is ready to eat. It can be put into tablets. It can be put into capsules. It really becomes the choice of the person who's using it. So spirulina is a tremendous thing. We've talked about it as a food source, but perhaps Hill's greatest accomplishment was to figure out how to extract all the untold treasures that were found within spirulina. And he used to tell me all the time, he said, we're going to figure out ways to take these carotenes out of the spirulina. We're going to be able to extract these carotenes. We're going to be able to grow carotenes in algae and then extract the carotenes, because the carotenes are what are really, really important aside from the food source. You can have the food source and the carotenes. And so Hills actually came up with a way to extract the carotenes from spirulina. It took many, many years. He calls this extract ficatine. And you can see an early, I think this is a high-speed chromatography analysis of the extract, and you can see by its peaks, and in it has zeaxanthin and cryptoxanthin and mylosantrophyll. It's got chlorophyll, ketocarotenoids. It's got all trans-beta-carotene. It's got D-cis beta-carotene and 9-cis beta-carotene. And I know that I've always heard Sebastian Thomas and Hills always talk about the 9-cis was the best of all of the beta-carotenes, the purest form. And you can see that in this extract of ficatine, it has all of that. So he developed a process for patenting the carotenes and the other pigments. And what's really important, he was one of the first people to do this and really show that the carotenes were accessible in spirulina and other algae. And he was so fascinated by this that we started looking out and see who else was doing any kind of research on carotenes. And we bumped into the fact that Harvard University and their School of Oral Pathology was just finishing up a study that was sponsored by Hoffman-LaRoche. Now, Hoffman-LaRoche is and probably was the biggest manufacturer of synthetic vitamins and minerals around. And they made synthetic beta-carotene. They made synthetic canthaxanthin and others. And they had funded a research project at the School of Oral Pathology, and it was done on hamsters. Hamsters have what's called a buccal pouch. It's a pouch inside their mouth that researchers will inject with virulent cancers and then see if they can provide the hamsters with something that will regress that growth of cancers or different things. So we were a very small little company. This was in probably 92, maybe 93. We called in, we basically cold called into these doctors at Harvard and said, you know, wouldn't you like to continue to do your experiments? And they said, no, we're just wrapping up the lab and closing it down. And we said, well, wouldn't you be interested in seeing how natural carotenes fare against synthetic carotenes? And we somehow piqued their curiosity. Hills was fairly persuasive. And we got them for the sum of, I think it was $87,000 to do one more round. $87,000 in research terms is a very small amount of money. To do another round of research in their lab and compare it to the Hoffman-LaRoche products. And after several rounds of research, what they found was that you can see this is synthetic beta-carotene, this is retinoic acid, this is alpha-carotene, here's canthaxanthin, and this is ficotine. And this graph is in terms of positive macrophages that determine tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is very important in fighting malignancies in the body. So you can see the difference, how much, this is about 24 on the scale. I mean, beta-carotene's about 2.5. So you can see that it was almost 10 times more powerful, the extracts from spirulina, than the synthetic beta-carotene. And what it proved was the ficotine, which was just a trade name, but the ficotine or the extracts from spirulina were far superior to all the other carotenes in basically enhancing the immune system. Along the way, spirulina has helped an awful lot of people and a lot of kids. This is a lot of our distributors over the years raise their children on spirulina smoothies. You can see, as we talked about, it's a tremendous whole food. It's got a tremendous amount of protein. It's got beta-carotene and other carotenes, lots of B vitamins, minerals. It's got the pigments, phycocyanin, which is the blue, chlorophyll, which is the green, and all the carotenoids, which are orange. And you can really see what a powerhouse spirulina is. Along the way, we've helped not only kids, we've helped some dolphins along the way. There's a dolphin research center in Florida that contacted us when their particular dolphin got sick. Unfortunately, when dolphins get sick, they stop eating, which obviously creates a downhill spiral for the dolphins. And they consulted with Hills, and Hills flew out there and brought a lot of spirulina. And what Hills essentially did was take the fish, and he breaded the fish in spirulina and just fed it to the dolphins. And the dolphins ate the fish that was breaded in spirulina, and the sick dolphins were cured with spirulina. Now, spirulina is probably a part of the natural dolphin diet, spirulina and other algae in the oceans. But you can see spirulina has a lot of benefits to a lot of different species. One of those is me. I've been taking spirulina smoothies now for 20-plus years. As I mentioned, I went into this as a total non-believer. It probably took them 6 months just to get me to take some tablets. Probably took me 3 or 4 years before I would even try the spirulina powder. And once I tried the spirulina powder, and it has a unique taste. It's got a somewhat of a marine type taste. It's not terrible, but it's got a taste that you have to acquire. Once I acquired the taste, I've been having spirulina smoothies for breakfast for easily 20 years now. I tend to be an early riser. I get up early in the morning, go to the gym. I have my spirulina smoothies at probably around 4 o'clock in the morning. I can go 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon without getting hungry. I'm 64 years old, have more energy than a lot of the young kids in the office, and a lot of that I attribute to spirulina. Making a smoothie simple, just put about 10 to 12 ounces of your favorite juice. You can use less in it if you want to. I also put in 2 scoops of a product we call Slim Shake Vanilla to give it a vanilla flavor. I throw a banana in to the blender. I like my smoothies to have a little bit of chill to them, so I take 1 to 2 handfuls of frozen blackberries and I throw that into the blender also. I want to smooth it out, so I put a little bit of 2 to 3 tablespoons of non-fat yogurt. Years and years and years ago in the 60s, I started, I read in the Adele Davis book about taking lecithin, and I've been taking lecithin ever since. I use probably about 1.5 tablespoons of lecithin powder. It helps emulsify everything in it, and lecithin is very good for you. I use 2 to 3 tablespoons of spirulina powder in my smoothie. I don't recommend starting off at that stage. I recommend starting off like at a third of a teaspoon and slowly working your way up. This isn't about who's the biggest gunslinger in town. It's about getting yourself in the habit of good nutrition, and the best way to do that is to start off small. You can see that a teaspoon of spirulina powder is about 3 grams of spirulina. 1 tablespoon is about 9 grams. So I'm in 2 to 3 tablespoons. I'm getting between 18 and 27 grams of protein in my smoothie every morning. You can see a picture of me coming in. I came in about 6th in the Tour de France, and you can see how spirulina has really helped me. Now, if you believe that one, you'll believe probably much anything I tell you. I do ride a bicycle, not at this level, but I do ride a bike, and I'm still riding a bike 30, 40, 50 miles and enjoying it. And a lot of that I attribute to spirulina and just general good health. One of the things I really want to do now is to take this story to another level, which I think is really amazing. And that's to talk a little bit about Christopher Hills that I've talked about and Clinton Howard, because these two guys were really true pioneers. They didn't know each other for most of their lives. They met in 1996, but it amazes me how parallel their lives have been. In 96, Clinton Howard purchased the Light Force company from Christopher Hills, and RBC became the home for Light Force distributors and the products and the vision of Christopher Hills. I had left Light Force in early 96, and Clinton Howard called me in 98 and wanted someone to run the operations here, and I've been here since 1998, as Sherry mentioned. So I've been with these products since 1981. And some of the same distributors, some of the same products for 28 plus years, and really had the good fortune of working closely with both of these guys. Christopher Hills, as I mentioned, was a spirulina pioneer going back to the early 60s. He created a product called Immune Pack in 1985. I remember when he came to me, and I think it was 83, and he said, we're going to come up with a product that's got beta-carotene in it to improve the immune system. And I hate to admit it now, but I said, what's beta-carotene and what's an immune system? In 1985, nobody was talking about either one of those things, and it was 1983. And it took Hills 2 years to create it, but he came up with a product with ficatine and other elements that he called Immune Pack. He developed ficatine. It helps enhance immune cells. It's totally non-toxic. He did the research at Harvard University. He used ficatine as an immune-stimulating ingredient in a lot of his products. And he was truly recognized as one of the major forces in the production of an advancement of spirulina around the world. Clinton Howard, you'll know, is the founder and chairman of the board of RBC Life Sciences. Clinton Howard, as a young man, was in Texas. He had, just like Christopher Hills, he had started a series of laboratories and ran those laboratories until they spread across country. Right around, I think he wasn't quite 30 years old, but he retired between 35 and 40 years old, made a lot of money from selling the laboratories, and he decided that he wanted to get involved in nutrition. And he had heard a lot of the stories about aloe vera, and aloe vera, this is in the 70s, was really taking off in Texas. Everybody was selling everything with aloe vera in it, putting a very small amount of aloe vera in the product, and calling it aloe vera. And he didn't want to do that. He was fascinated by the plant, just like Hills was fascinated by the algae. And he knew that there were all kinds of anecdotal stories from people all over the world putting aloe vera on the skin to soothe burns, ingesting aloe vera to soothe the intestinal tract. And he was fascinated by this plant, and then what he wanted to do is figure out what was it about the aloe vera plant that would cause these remarkable things to happen to people. Again, just like Hills, really for hundreds of years, indigenous people have been using the aloe vera plant. So in 1974, he founded Carrington Laboratories, and he built it and he staffed it primarily to research aloe vera. And some of the gentlemen that you mentioned at the beginning of your program were some of the first people he hired. He hired Dr. Bill McAnally to head the research for him. Dr. Reggie McDaniel was also involved with that team. Dr. Alexis Iberendu, who's working with us now, was also a researcher on that team. And they spent an awful lot of years doing exactly what Clinton Howard wanted them to do, was let's find out what is in the aloe vera that's causing the medicinal properties. And a lot of money, and about 11 years later, they realized that what it was, the active ingredient that they found in aloe vera, that it really stimulated the immune system. And it comes from the aloe vera gel, not the outside leaf or rind. It comes from the gel itself. And the gel is basically made up of long-chain polysaccharides. And those long-chain polysaccharides will stimulate the immune system. Clinton, after finding that out, well, before finding out, when they thought that was what it was, they started doing a lot of research at Texas A&M University to prove that they were correct. And they did find out, the Texas A&M University did validate the fact that the aloe vera, the long-chain polysaccharides, were stimulating the immune system by making more immune cells, making those immune cells larger, and giving those immune cells the ability to signal between themselves much more than they had otherwise. And it was the beefing of the immune system that was causing the healing. It was actually the body's immune system that was causing the healing of the skin or the soothing of the esophagus. And he was the first person to realize that and document it. He sent all the research to the American Medical Association. They reviewed all of the research. They said that the research was valid, and they named his discovery Ace Mannan. And as you can see, this is a cross-section of aloe vera. Mr. Howard has always insisted that we use nothing but the internal gel of the aloe vera. You fillet the aloe vera very much like you would fillet a fish. There are certain ingredients, anthocanones, that are this sort of yellowy substance here that are very bitter tasting, and you don't want to be eating that. And he realized that some people were touting the whole leaf, which was you take all of this and you grind it up, and they were touting that as much superior. The truth is it was a much cheaper way to make aloe vera because you didn't have any special handling and used 100% of the leaf. But Clinton always insisted that we use nothing but the inner fillet in all of the products. So Clinton Howard was also an aloe vera pioneer, just like Christopher Hills was a spirulina pioneer. In 1974, he came out with a product he called True Aloe, which was a drink that was 65% aloe, where most drinks were in the 10% or less stage. He discovered Ace Mannan, and it helps enhance immune cells, just like spirulina does, and it was completely non-toxic. He did his research at Texas A&M. Hills did his research at Harvard University. He developed aloe-mannan as an ingredient in his products, which is the dried aloe. And he became a major force in the production of aloe vera across the world. And anybody in the aloe industry, when they talk about Clinton Howard, they talk about Dr. Aloe. And it amazed me at the parallels in these two gentlemen's lives. They both were very, very focused. They both were in businesses that they became very successful before they were 40. They retired as millionaires. They weren't satisfied being retired. They were both led to nutrition. Hills to finding a solution for world hunger. Clinton Howard being able to find some things that would really help people improve their lives through nutrition. They both did research on it. They both became the major forces in these ingredients: aloe vera, long-chain polysaccharides, spirulina, carotenes, and pigments. Now, early on, when I didn't understand the immune system, Hills told me this story, and we were on a plane going someplace, and he was saying, well, just, nature provides plants, and plants provide food, and their job is basically to stand out in sunlight all day long, take in the bad stuff, carbon monoxide, basically turn it into sugars and create food and return oxygen. But they've got to stay out in the sun, which is radiation. So nature's smart. It provides little sort of raincoats or umbrellas to protect a plant life from the radiation from the sun. And these things become things like carotenes and xanthophylls and pigments. When you see the colors changing in the fall, those are carotenes signaling to the tree that we're approaching winter, and start restructuring the tree and keeping your resources sort of inside because we're going to go through a few months of hard times. That's all carotene signaling. That's part of the immune system of trees and plants. And for humans, we have an immune system that does fairly much the same thing. It protects us from things that might invade our body. And the problem with it is that we've got so many things now that are out there that cause us problems. The substances that are put in our food, the foreign substances that are all around us, they start weakening the immune system. All the different pollutants in the air, again, help to weaken that immune system. And so we need some protection. And the protection really is the immune system. Our immune system is made up of white blood cells. There's macrophages, which are sort of the samurai of the immune system. There's T cells and B cells and killer cells and suppressor cells. And these are all the different cells in the immune system. And the immune system's function, there's scout cells, and they go out and they look to see if there's some sort of disease or virus or bacteria that's out there that's basically foreign to the body. And as soon as they see those, then they signal to other cells in the immune system that, hey, there's the bad guys are coming, we've got to get ready for them, which in turn pulls out all of the macrophages and all the different other kinds of white cells to help fight the infection in the body. Now, it's really important if you realize this is the structure of it, it's obviously very simplified, that if this is what protects you, you're going to want to have a whole lot of these cells, a whole lot of the immune cells. You want them to be pretty big and strong cells, and you want to make sure they have the best signaling equipment possible, that the signals between one cell and the other are uninterrupted, and the other cells get the message that there's somebody here that we need to go in and eat and get rid of. So the immune system is a very simple thing, but it's very, very complex at the same time. There's billions of immune cells, and when you look at the history of aloe vera and the history of spirulina and realize that the long-chain polysaccharides in aloe vera and the keratins and pigments in spirulina do all three things. They give you more of these guys, they're stronger, their signaling capability is better. They do exactly what you want your immune system to do. They enhance it. And when I really look back at all this history, and neither one of these two realized it. Hills passed away, unfortunately, in '97. Clint didn't know an awful lot of the history, but they never realized how parallel their lives were until we started developing a product. And you can see here, this is, in my mind, it's a representation of the keratins and pigments and a representation of the polysaccharides. And I really want to show you that based on their 20 years of previous research, these guys that really never worked together as researchers created the major ingredients today. Didn't create, excuse me, they did the research that proved that these ingredients were stimulating the immune system. And for us, that became the remake of the 1983 dream of Christopher Hill's of Immune Pack, and it became Immune 360. Now, when we made Immune 360, it was probably about 2 or 3 years in the planning. And Clinton Howard said to our researchers that he wanted them to go out and find all the immune-stimulating ingredients that had really solid research. He didn't want to have anything that just had some minor research. He wanted to have solid research for the ingredients to put into the product. So that's what we were looking for. We're looking for spirulina. We weren't looking for long-chain polysaccharides. And what we've ended up with is a combination. There's 4 subcomponents in Immune 360. We call one the immune blend, one the allomannan blend, one the ficatine complex, and then there's other support ingredients. And I'm not going to go I'm going to go through every ingredient, but very quickly. But I want to point out that the 4 different blends. Now, we had all of these ingredients. This product was already formulated. When I started looking at the ingredients and taking a look at what they were relative to what Hills had done and what Clinton and Howard had done. And in the immune blend, we've got 5 different ingredients. Ashwagandha, that's been around a long time. It's an Ayurvedic herb that's been used for thousands of years. It helps the body to resist disease. We've got astragalus. Astragalus is something that supports immune cells that are responsible for neutralizing the foreign invaders in the body. And when you look at the makeup of astragalus, it's really in the long-chain polysaccharide family. You have ellagic acid, which is really a polyphenol. Ellagic acid helps protect cells against outside damage. Ellagic acid really isn't a keratin or pigment, but when you look at what polyphenols are, it's very close to it. Maitake mushroom has been known to be immune stimulating. It contains specific glucans, 1 in 3 branch chains and 1 in 6 linkages that increase immune competent cell activity. When you look at its makeup, long-chain polysaccharide. Lycopene is a pigment. It's found mainly in tomatoes. It's also found in some algae. And it's definitely one of those keratin-type pigments. And lycopene, like I said, you've heard an awful lot about lycopene. The allomannan blend is a combination of aloe vera gel, and we've talked about that aloe gel stimulates immune cells, creates macrophages, it enhances immune response. It also has a beta-glucan, and beta-glucan helps to increase and stimulate macrophages, and macrophages are sort of the samurai of the immune system. Beta-glucan will also help the signaling properties between cells. Again, long-chain polysaccharides. Larch-arabinogalactin has been shown to help build more responsive immune cells, especially in fighting microbial infections. And we know that it also enhances the natural killer cells. Again, a long-chain polysaccharide. You can see the pattern here. Most of the ingredients that we found were either keratines and pigments or long-chain polysaccharides. The phycatine extracts certainly are the keratines and pigments. We talked about phycatine, which is really a combination of extracts from spirulina and Dunellia algae. It's got all the beta-carotenes, the alpha-carotenes, the zeaxanthins, the myeloxanthophils, bixin, beta-apoate carotenol. It's got the pigments, which are the phycocyanin, the chlorophyll, keratines, the xanthophyls, and it's got astaxanthin. Now, back in 1983-84, Hills insisted that astaxanthin be in his original immune pack. And it took me about 10 years just to pronounce astaxanthin. But at that time, the only source of astaxanthin that we could find was crayfish oil. And we found a supplier, somebody who grew crayfish in New Orleans or farmed it, and we talked them into selling us barrels of crayfish oil, which was really nasty stuff to work with. But it was the only source of astaxanthin we could find at the time. Now astaxanthin is being extracted from algae. And so when you look at Hill's dream of being able to extract some of these things from algae, technology has moved ahead, and a lot of these things are now available that never were available to him before. The other supporting ingredients that we put in is the protector vitamins, which are commonly referred to as vitamins A, E, and C. Those are what most people refer to as antioxidants. There are many more antioxidants, but the protector vitamins are in there. Zinc is also very helpful in supporting the immune system. Selenium is a good antioxidant. We not only put in the extracts, but we actually put in spirulina powder in Immune 360 because of its proteins, its beta-carotenes, the vitamins, the mineral, and all the pigments. But we really feel that by adding spirulina as a whole food source, we really make the Immune 360 a much stronger product. So you can see that Immune 360 really becomes your circle of defense. It has all of nature's protectors, the keratines, the pigments, the polysaccharides, vitamins, minerals, and superfoods. And to me, you can see that these two gentlemen were truly immune system pioneers. They really didn't know it while they were doing it, but they both had a vision. They both had a quest to do research, Hills in terms of spirulina, Clinton Howard in terms of algae. And to me, Dr. Marvin, this is just a fascinating story of two people putting their minds to something and really being true pioneers and helping all of us improve our health and providing ingredients that will improve the immune systems.
It's unbelievable. It's amazing how they both worked on the same route, not knowing each other.
It is. And when I first sat down with Clint and I said, Clint, do you realize that you did this and Hills did that? He said, well, no. And when even when I showed him most of the parallels, he still didn't get it until actually I sort of drew it out for him. And then he said, well, that's amazing. You know, they were both self-made men. They both had businesses. They both contributed of themselves and all of their the money that they earned into their passion. And luckily for us, their passion were into these wonderful food sources.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, I'd think from your presentation that the people that are, the vegans would go for spirulina completely. I mean, as a daily ingredient in their smoothie, so to say, because, I was told in medical school that there's only one plant source of B12, and that was some cucumber-like thing in Australia. And here you've got a tremendous source of B12 in spirulina.
That's right. And we do have a lot of vegans, vegetarians that have been drawn to spirulina for that very reason, Dr. Marvin. And when you look at the combination of the B12 and the extremely high protein source, along with the protection of the keratines, you can see that the places where someone who's on a vegan diet, they could have problems. That's all beefed up because of the spirulina.
And, kwashiorkor over in Africa, which kids get, because they don't have a good source, you'd think spirulina would cure that whole area, or cure is a bad word to say, but, reverse their kwashiorkor. Well,
that I think we're all believers, as I think Dr. David mentioned at the beginning. Nature provides a lot, if not all, of the solutions to our problems. And this isn't about a miracle food or a drug. This is basically about good common sense of feeding your immune system.
Sure.
A lot of people are more concerned about the motor oil they put in the car than they are about the quality of food they put in their bodies, because we don't see the connection between our bodies and good health, and it's really unbelievable that a sophisticated society has gotten so sophisticated that they just ignore the basic place where all of our energy is coming from and all of our good health.
See, when I was in medical school, my total nutrition training was a 15-minute lecture about supplements and nutrition, which was all negative.
Yep.
And the teacher said, now, this is all nonsense. It's not needed, because if your patients are on a good regular diet, they'll get everything they need. And theoretically, that should be true, but it isn't. That's absolutely not true, and every year that goes by, we have more absence in our food source because of green harvesting, corporate farming, and et cetera. But I agree with you 100%. People eat unbelievably. I know, taking histories as a physician and hearing what people were eating, even when I didn't know much about nutrition, I at least know that that wasn't any good.
Yeah, it is amazing.
But this is just wonderful to hear this presentation of yours concerning spirulina. And I'm just amazed. I hadn't heard, frankly, until this summer even about spirulina. You know, I'd heard about algae. I did a lot of work on algae because my field at the time was omega-3s.
Uh-huh.
And how good a source is spirulina for omega, or do you have to use a different source?
Well, I would say, spirulina has omega-3 fatty acids.
Right.
It's got gamma-linolenic acid, linoleic acid, oleic acid, stearic acid.
Epilenic and all the rest.
Yes. But it doesn't have them in tremendous quantities. It's part of the algae's structure. So will it provide some omega-3s? There's no question about it. Will it provide the omega-3s that I think we all feel we should be supplementing our diet with? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of research now, just like I mentioned with the astaxanthin. 20 years ago, you couldn't get astaxanthin from any place, and now they're extracting astaxanthin from algae. I remember being with Hills in Israel with our Israeli partners probably sometime in the 80s, and one of the gentlemen they introduced us to was a scientist, and he was trying to extract lycopene from tomatoes. Well, that's the same gentleman that ended up discovering that and got the patent on it, and is probably their company is one of the suppliers of lycopene around the world. But I think it's the same thing with omega-3s. There are better sources of omega-3s, healthier sources of omega-3s than fish oil. Yeah. And as we go forward more and more, we will see more and more of those. A company called Martech gets its DHA from algae, not from spirulina, but from another algae. That's a very, very good product. We carry that product. And there are other researchers along the way that are looking to extract all the omega-3s from different algae. That's just around the corner.
Well, cryo and things of that nature, they tell me in New Zealand they don't use fish oil at all to get their omega-3s.
Huh.
I just read an article on that.
And where do they get them from?
They get it from a plant.
Oh, okay.
There's also another company.
Plant source.
Forgive me for butting in. There's also another company that is getting the omega-3s from the green-lipped mussels.
Yes.
Right. I heard about that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. They seem to get some really good quality of omegas out of that.
And you want to know a secret? You know where the green-lipped mussel and all of those fish get their omega-3s from? Algae.
Yes.
Algae.
Algae. Most of the life forms in the ocean survive on algae, not just blue-green spirulina, but on algae. Algae is the food source of, I mentioned to you before we started the program that there's more algae produced in the oceans than all of the food stuff on the planet. And it's an abundant source of food that has been used, obviously, for marine life for centuries. And there's an awful lot of positive things in algae as we look at it as something for humans, a human food source.
You know, I was told in omega-3s you have to get fish from cold water because they store more of it from the algae. They store it more because the water's cold. Whereas it was amazing to me to find out that that must be why the whales come south around Hawaii and then go back north to Alaska area, or at least in more temperate, colder climates. And they must come south to pick up the algae, because if it's this same algae you're talking about, and all of them are of that nature, they can't stand cold water.
Yeah. Now, I think some of them will survive in colder waters. The spirulina cannot survive. Well, spirulina is not an ocean-borne algae, but the algae of the ocean, the blue-green algae of the ocean, are the major food source. And I think we're what I see in the next 10 or 15 years, looking back at my experience in the last 15, 20 years, is that there's going to be even more quantum leaps ahead of finding good food sources from algae and other things. You can read them, magazines now are talking about using hydrogen to as a fuel source for automobiles. Well, there's a lot of companies that are trying to extract that from algae, because algae creates a biomass, and that biomass churns out hydrogen and a lot of other things. So there's algae in the future. And NASA has been studying algae for years, spirulina in particular, because on deep space flights, they could grow spirulina on a space station or a spaceship, I guess, provide oxygen for the astronauts as well as a high protein source.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
It's amazing. Now, do you have the spirulina powder that is on the market?
Yeah, we sell spirulina powder in 8-ounce and 16-ounce containers. We sell spirulina tablets, which are, as I showed in that picture, just simply the algae tablet. Each tablet of spirulina is about 500 milligrams, or half a gram. Mm-hmm. And then we sell spirulina in capsule form, because some people have an easier time swallowing capsules than they have with tablets.
But you'd have to swallow several of them, wouldn't you?
Yes, you take several of those. So we've got several different types of spirulina. We also have spirulina, as Sherry pointed out before the show, in a wonderful spirulina whole food bar, which provides about 1.6 grams of spirulina in a very nutritious organic food bar. What I would encourage anybody who's interested in changing their health, in improving their health, to try spirulina. Don't do what I do. Don't throw 2 tablespoons of spirulina in your first smoothie, because you might never try it again. But if you start off with tablets, that's fine. The powder is easier to use, because when you look at, what did I say, I could get about 2 tablespoons is 18 grams of spirulina. I would have to take 36 tablets to equal those 2 tablespoons. Oh. So it's a much more available source of the spirulina than it is in tablet form. But there's nothing wrong with taking tablets or capsules. And I think if you start off with tablets or capsules, or if you're someone who does a smoothie already, start off with just a little bit of a teaspoon, a third of a teaspoon. And mostly when I tell people, they come back, so I didn't even taste it. Well, great. Now try a little bit more of a teaspoon. And over a year or two, if you go up to a tablespoon and maybe 2 tablespoons in 2 years, you're going to end up feeling much better. And it doesn't take you 2 years to feel better. You can start feeling better in a matter of a couple of weeks. And the energy that it gives you, the vitality that it gives you, is just something that I wouldn't be without. It's become a part of my life, and I started this off as a skeptic. But I guess I'm sort of the Pied Piper of spirulina now, but I'm always the one in the office convincing some of the younger staff to try this stuff, and then it seems like a couple of months later they come back and say, well, I really feel better. I really feel that energy. And that's where you want to get. When you start, if you start feeling good, you start exercising more, and you start feeling good, you start having less stress in your life. And it's just what David said at the very, very beginning. This is all a holistic approach. We don't live in isolation. And spirulina can become one element to help you on that path. And I think it's a wonderful thing to try. It's really changed my life, and I think you'll find it to be a wonderful product.
Now, if you did take 2 tablespoons and never had any before, does it upset your stomach or your intestinal tract?
Not usually. I mean, some people, and I really even hadn't heard this for years, but early on, I remember people when they start off with spirulina, spirulina also helps release toxins from the body.
Right.
So some people in the first couple of days of trying spirulina felt sluggish and like they were feeling sick. And we'd always tell them that your body's dumping toxins and that's natural. But I don't know if people are eating better or not, but I really haven't heard that as much. But the only negative when you start, other than the people getting used to the taste, I had a real tough time drinking something green. I don't know what it is, but I had a really tough time. I ended up using a very brightly colored cup for about 3 years, so I couldn't see the green. And I also used grape juice to make it look almost black because I had something about the green. But it won't usually upset your stomach. Usually the only thing that people might experience is dumping some toxins and having a little bit of a few days of feeling sluggish.
I see. I just wondered. I figured it was something about the dumping, which is what we call that.
Yes.
The dumping of toxins. And I've had patients just drink, much more water, like 8 glasses of 8 ounce of water, good clear water, pure water, and let that flush them out. So that's why I was asking you that.
Yeah, I think that certainly water would be very, very helpful
to wash out the toxins. Well, there's sure an awful lot of great information here. I sure appreciate it. David, my computer dropped connections and I can't get back on. Is there any questions?
Oh, yes, there are a couple, and we just want to make this quick announcement, folks, that if you have any questions, please type them into your chat box, the chat box, the blue screen, the chat box in the blue screen to your right. And I have to say this, Ken, that this webinar actually went for an hour and a half, and the presentation itself, and this probably is the fewest number of people we've actually seen drop off from a webinar that long. I mean, the story and the whole presentation has been gripping. So this has been really, really good. So thank you again.
Well, you're welcome. I always have fun telling the story. I mean, as I said at the very beginning, I had the good fortune to be around and involved in some of this activity, and it was a very colorful part of my life. Christopher Hills and Clinton Howard were both very important people to me. Clint, I consider it to be a good friend and a colleague, and I just think that there's both of these men's stories is really unique and fascinating.
Mm-hmm. They should be written in books. There should be a book written of what you just told us.
Well, maybe I'll do that.
I think it'd be wonderful. Pioneers, no matter if you're talking about space age or penicillin or whatever, penicillin comes from mold originally, and this comes from algae, and the word about algae is getting more and more in medicine.
Right.
It is, and I think that, and in both of them in their own ways, when you look at a pioneer, it's like setting a wave in motion.
Sure.
There's more research being done now on algae, and more research being done on aloe vera because these men went out there and did this research. It really ends up setting a wave, a ripple going in the water, and then more people do research about it. And
right.
What fascinates me about both of these guys is that they had ideas that most people would say, yeah, sure, yeah, Christopher, you're gonna solve world hunger, and Clinton, you're a fool. Everybody's selling this aloe vera and making a lot of money, and you're doing research, And it's someone who decides to go against the grain that I think is part of this fascinating story. They decided that what they had in their heads and in their hearts was correct, and they just pursued it.
And usually those pioneers run into a lot of opposition. It's the momentum. They've got to get the big rock to move a little bit and struggle a while, and then pretty soon it rolls on its own. And probably that's what's happened now, that the rock is now rolling, so to speak, on research in spirulina and in aloe vera products.
You're right. You're right, Dr. Marvin.
Well, we're going to start taking some questions now, but before we start reading out the questions, first thing, this webinar is being recorded. However, we have to, RBC headquarters have asked that we send them the recording first for them to give it the okay, so it may not be available for about a week or so, just so you know. Also, Ken, RBC have, again, generously offered to give us a discount for those of you who would like to try the spirulina product and the Immune 360 product.
Yes, what we've done, Dr. David, is I've really coupled together the Immune 360, which we talked about, and spirulina capsules, because I think that will be the easiest way for people to start off. And what I've decided to do was give the people on a webinar a price of 20% off of our wholesale price for those two products.
Oh, fantastic.
So the wholesale price for the two bottles in the United States would be $77, and we'll sell you both of those bottles, one of each, for $58. In Canada, the wholesale is $91, and the price will be $68.
Oh, fantastic.
And like last time, if people can contact you in terms of placing the orders, if that worked for you last time, that worked for us too.
Okay, great. So, folks, just email us, Jerry or myself, and then we'll just compile the names. And please give me your number as well, your phone number and your email address, and then we'll send them over to the RBC, and they will contact you for your orders. Does that work? Excellent. And someone asked, do you sell this in Europe as well?
We do not sell it in Europe, no.
Okay.
But they sell it in, don't you sell it in Russia?
Yes, we sell it in Russia. Actually, I take that back. We do have an affiliate in Sweden who does market into Europe, and I think they do that online.
Okay.
And we do have a large affiliate in Russia and the former Soviet Union countries, and in really what we would consider to be Eastern Europe.
Great. We have a lot of people saying thank you for this webinar. It has been very informative. They really enjoyed it, and so did we. So thank you again, Ken.
You're welcome.
I want to say one thing, David. If they have any doubts, if they could see Ken and his activity of riding that bicycle, I mean, that would cinch the whole thing to a lot of people.
I actually believed that Tour de France thing at first.
I did ride in something called the Tour de Pants in Texas, and that was for me a grueling 50 or 60 miles or so uphill.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
All right. Someone says, "Can one OD on spirulina?" Thanks.
Obviously, everybody has sort of individual taste that at some point you OD on something, but physically you cannot. Throughout the years, we've had different people who take a tremendous amount of spirulina. When we were building that Desert Hot Springs facility, one of the people who were involved, and one of the foremen, decided he was going to go on a spirulina fast, and he ate nothing but spirulina and fruit juice for a couple of months. And we kept sending him over to the Eisenhower Medical Center, and he was in wonderful shape. So I don't know that I've never heard anybody saying that you're not going to eat too much and get sick.
Okay. Would spirulina help with taking out mercury from the blood? I know you said it detoxifies.
I don't know that for sure, but I do know that algae in general is used to clean up toxic spills. And algae tends to pull out that bad stuff and churn out good stuff. I really couldn't say whether it will take mercury out of the blood.
Okay. Whoever asked that question, please contact us. That there might be something that can help remove mercury from the blood too. Okay, I have a jar of spirulina powder that is several years old. Do you think it is rancid or okay? It still smells good.
If number one, if it hasn't been exposed to moisture, and it still is, a fluffy and it's not stuck together, it should be good. In fact, the original thing that Hills marketed spirulina for in 1979 and 80 was a survival food. He used to sell it in 50-gallon drums because if it's kept away from moisture and sunlight, the spirulina will stay good for years.
Mm.
So, I mean, if it smells okay, it's probably going to be okay.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And 2 years old is not a real long time, or even 3 years old for a jar of spirulina.
That's terrific.
Mm-hmm. All right, this has been a very captivating presentation. Please explain the difference between chlorella and spirulina. Do they taste the same? Are they just as good? Why is it less visible than chlorella?
Well, that's a good question. Chlorella is a different type of algae. It tends to be a sort of a very round algae. It sort of has a husk on it that, from a harvesting point of view, you have to centrifuge the chlorella, where the spirulina is very simple to harvest. Now that's more on a technical end of it. Spirulina has a little bit higher profile of protein than chlorella does, but that isn't to say that chlorella doesn't have protein. Chlorella has been the mainstay of the Japanese for a long, long time. The Japanese aren't real spirulina users, and it goes back to something historic that happened a long time ago, and they're basically chlorella eaters. I'm not sure why chlorella, to some people chlorella has a better name. I know that Hill's always insisted, even though we were marketing spirulina, he always insisted that we not talk down about chlorella because chlorella was a fantastic food source, and he considered it to be the next best thing to spirulina. In fact, he talked very often about combining the two together and having a spirulina chlorella product. So the main differences, I think, have to do with, there probably is a little bit difference in taste between the chlorella and the spirulina. Spirulina's got a little bit more of the protein in it. I think that that chlorella also has a fairly good carotene complex in its base also. So fairly similar products.
Okay. Okay. Rudy wants to know what is the website's name. I guess that would be RBC Life Sciences.
Yeah, rbclifesciences.com.
.com. Okay. And again, if you want to order the products, you just email us so we can compile your lists and then send that over to RBC. Is the spirulina in the Immune 360 product the same in volume as the powder you recommend? If not, how many grams of spirulina is in the Immune 360 formula?
It is the same spirulina. It's the same powder. It's certainly not 27 grams. I don't. Let's see. Maybe I do have a bottle. I do have a bottle in my desk right here, and there's 100 milligrams of spirulina per every 2 capsules. So it doesn't have a tremendous amount of spirulina. I was mentioning that a spirulina tablet has 500 milligrams, so that's 10 times the amount that's in one of the Immune 360. So the Immune 360 has a little bit, but it's not a pure spirulina product at all.
Got it.
One thing I will mention, I forgot to mention about our source of spirulina. It is the only organic source of spirulina in the world. And it has to do, the organic standards are very, very strict. Spirulina does need a nitrogen source in order to grow. And a lot of the companies, very reputable companies, that have grown spirulina in the past and called theirs organic. The laws changed, the rules changed for organic, what you can consider organic for spirulina, and Sebastian Thomas and his crew were the only people in the world that had the foresight of coming up with a different way of doing it, and right now they are the only certified organic facility in the world.
And that's where you get all your spirulina from?
Yes. We have not only from a personal point of view, but from a business point of view, a very, very wonderful relationship with Sebastian Thomas and the company he works for. Obviously, he's part of this story and part of this history, worked right alongside Hills for many, many years, was instrumental in the extraction, discovering the extraction process, is probably, I was always said to people that if he and his wife Swati are probably one of the top 10 algae spirulina experts in the world, and he corrected me last time I saw him and said we're probably in the top 5.
Oh,
so,
wow.
and these are people who have been doing this for 30-plus years at a very, very high and intense level, all the way from the early days of riding a bicycle to keep the water moving in a pond to that beautiful production facility in India. So we truly value that relationship. Some of the extracts from spirulina that we put in Immune 360 we get from their extraction processes. So we feel very, very fortunate to be partners with them over the long term, and I feel very fortunate to have had almost a 30-year history with them.
Wow.
Wow. Well, it shows that you can still maintain a good relationship even after being laid off.
Yeah, that always scared me because that was you never like to do that, and they were a young couple with a couple of young kids, and but I think that they told me last time we had dinner together with Clint Howard, and we were all talking and sort of laughing about the past, and he was saying it was the best thing that ever happened to him because they went back and developed this tremendous facility.
Mm-hmm.
So, things work out in the long run.
Right, right. Okay, how much beta-glucan is in Immune 360?
Okay, you guys are putting me through my paces here. I don't have the exact formulation, but it's part of the aloe mannan blend, and so that blend has 550 milligrams per 2 capsules, and that's aloe vera gel, large arabinogalactan, and beta-glucan. So it's one of those 3 components that has 550 milligrams per serving.
Okay. All right. Would the high temperature in the final processing stage not kill the spirulina?
That's a great question. No, it does not. In spray dryers, it's not a very high temperature, but it's enough, and it's only at the very top of these big gigantic dryers where the heat is. It hits this flash of heat as it's being sort of sprayed out of this nozzle. Now, even after it's dewatered, it still has about 60% water as it goes into the spray dryer, and it just hits that heat, and then it just floats down. Once it goes through that little initial heat at the beginning, it floats down, and we've done lots of research to show that the nutrient content of the powder when it's dried is just as good as it is before it was dried.
Okay, great.
But that was a good question.
Yeah, it is. It's good to know. Someone is concerned, and I know we want to be careful about this, but someone is concerned that is it safe to give spirulina to someone with an autoimmune condition, like multiple myeloma, for instance? Not as a treatment, I think, but maybe would there be would it exacerbate the condition?
I don't know. I know that people that have severe autoimmune deficiencies or multiple myeloma or lymphomas and things of that sort, are doing different treatment modalities that are usually used to, in some ways to suppress the immune system. And you're talking about a natural product. I would always recommend talking with someone's physician or healthcare practitioner that one trusts. I don't want to try to suggest things one way or the other.
Right. Totally understood. So, folks, whoever has that question, that's the answer. Or you can contact, I don't know, Dr. Marvin.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Someone wanted to ask you a more personal question, but you can send that email to us after the webinar. I think this pretty much covers the questions that we have tonight. This has been great again, and Ken, do you like to say have any closing words for us?
Well, then I want to both thank Dr. Marvin, yourself, and Sherry for having me on. It's as I said, it's been a lot of fun for me. I like to tell this story, as I think that you can tell. I'm passionate about it. I really believe spirulina is one of those things that can help people on a lot of levels. And what I would say to anybody who's thinking of it, go ahead and try it. Try spirulina. Give it a month or so, and I think you'll definitely feel the difference. And for an awful lot of people, it changes the way they look at things, and it changes their energy levels, and provides them just what they need to go on and do other things. And I would encourage all of you to use spirulina, eat well, as Dr. Marvin was saying, and to exercise and enjoy life to the fullest.
You bet.
Well said. Well said. Dr. Marvin?
Yeah. I want to say that I think this is tremendous presentation. I've learned more tonight about spirulina. Of course, I didn't know anything to start with. Maybe in the last 2 weeks I've learned something, but I think this is really a modality I've been interested in but didn't know anything about. The source has always been something dear to me, algae, because I've learned a long time ago when I started studying nutrition. Algae had a lot of practice, had a lot of things in it that would really help people in their daily health.
Right. Well, this has been great, and again, thank you both Dr. Marvin and Ken and Sherry, and good night to everyone.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.